For over 30 years, Johnny Carson was the undisputed king of late-night television. Millions of people invited him into their living rooms every single night. To the audience, he was the ultimate friendly host, always ready with a clever joke and a warm smile. But behind the desk, Carson was an incredibly sharp, no-nonsense professional who absolutely despised dishonesty, massive egos, and Hollywood manipulation. If a celebrity walked onto his stage expecting an easy promotional interview but brought a bad attitude or a fake persona, they were walking into a carefully disguised trap. This is the definitive list of the most controversial, uncomfortable, and dramatic moments when Johnny Carson exposed, outsmarted, or completely humiliated his famous guests on live national television. Number 1. The total exposure of Yuri Geller.
He says that he claims to have been born, as I understand it, with the power of having psychokinetic ability.
In the 1970s, Yuri Geller was an international sensation, actively convincing the public and the media that he possessed genuine, unexplained supernatural abilities. His most famous routine involved supposedly bending solid metal spoons using only the power of his mind. He was booking massive television appearances and building a highly lucrative empire based entirely on these claims. However, when he agreed to appear on The Tonight Show in 1973, he made a massive miscalculation. What Geller did not fully realize was that before his legendary television career, Johnny Carson had been a highly skilled professional stage magician. Carson knew exactly how illusionists manipulated objects and audiences. Unwilling to let a guest deceive his millions of viewers on national television, Carson secretly contacted a famous investigator of supernatural claims to help prepare a quiet trap. When Geller arrived on set, he expected to use his own pre-selected spoons and props, which was his standard procedure. Instead, Carson and his producers completely surprised him by providing a table full of entirely different, heavily monitored spoons and objects that Geller's team had never touched. As the cameras rolled live, Carson politely but firmly asked Geller to demonstrate his famous abilities using the show's uncompromised items. What followed was one of the most agonizing, uncomfortable moments in television history. The silence in the studio was absolute as the audience watched a world-famous performer completely freeze. He nervously offered multiple excuses, repeatedly claiming he didn't feel strong enough that night, that he was feeling pressured, and that the television atmosphere was distracting him. Carson simply sat back behind his iconic desk, maintained a perfectly polite expression, watched the excruciating silence stretch on, and allowed the guest to completely expose his own limitations without ever raising his voice. It was a masterclass in quiet, calculated television justice, effectively dismantling Geller's supernatural credibility in front of the entire country. Tell me in the comments, do you think it was fair for Johnny Carson to secretly change the props to expose a guest, or was it a cruel trap? Number 2, the scripted frustration of Bob Hope.
I don't really what it is that
You know, you have all my sponsors there.
When discussing the absolute giants of 20th century entertainment, Bob Hope is a name that commands immediate historical recognition. He was a massive cinematic star, a pioneer of stand-up comedy, and an American institution. Because of his immense historical legacy, he was always granted a prominent seat next to Johnny Carson's iconic desk. However, behind the cameras, their dynamic was one of the most frustrating, tense, and uncomfortable relationships in the history of late-night television. Johnny Carson was an absolute master of conversational rhythm. He thrived on spontaneous reactions, quick wit, and genuine, unscripted interactions with his guests. He wanted real stories and authentic moments. Bob Hope, particularly in his later television years, operated completely differently. He viewed the television appearance not as a conversation, but as a heavily rehearsed, inflexible monologue. Whenever Hope appeared on the show, he would arrive with massive stacks of pre-written jokes and cue cards carefully prepared by his own writers. Instead of actually answering Carson's questions or engaging in natural dialogue, Hope would simply wait for a brief pause and then loudly deliver a completely unrelated rehearsed punchline. He essentially used the most famous talk show in the country as a free promotional billboard, completely ignoring the host sitting right next to him. This blatant lack of authenticity deeply irritated Carson, who absolutely hated fake television. While he respected Hope's historical contributions too much to openly yell at him on live broadcasting, Carson used his incredible subtle skills to expose the uncomfortable reality to the audience. Carson would visibly slump in his chair, tap his iconic pencil in clear annoyance, and offer exaggerated, forced laughter that perfectly highlighted the artificial nature of the interview. His facial expressions became a masterclass in passive-aggressive frustration. Show producers later confirmed that Carson absolutely dreaded these appearances because they destroyed the organic magic of his program. It was a fascinating, quiet television battle where the king of late night used silence and body language to expose a Hollywood legend who simply refused to be real. Tell me in the comments, do you think Johnny Carson was right to show his frustration? Or should he have just accepted the heavily rehearsed jokes from such a famous historical legend? Number 3, the complete banishment of Chevy Chase. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Chevy Chase was arguably the most famous and highly demanded comedy actor in the entertainment industry. Following his massive breakout success on late-night sketch television, he quickly transitioned into starring in major blockbuster cinematic comedies. His immense, undeniable popularity naturally led him to the guest chair and eventually the highly coveted guest host chair on Johnny Carson's legendary program. However, the highly arrogant, deeply superior attitude he portrayed on the screen was reportedly not an act. It was exactly how he behaved behind the cameras. Chase became widely infamous throughout the entertainment industry for his massive ego and his incredibly condescending treatment of the hardworking television crew and his fellow performers. Johnny Carson, despite his own massive power and influence, was a man who deeply respected the technical crew, the writers, and the collaborative nature of television production. He had absolutely zero tolerance for actors who treated the studio staff like inferior employees. When Chase would guest host the program, reports constantly surfaced about his extremely difficult behavior, his terrible attitude, and his blatant disrespect for the established rules of the studio. While Carson usually kept his absolute worst opinions strictly private, his deep disgust for Chase eventually spilled out into the open. Carson completely saw through the arrogant Hollywood persona and recognized a performer who lacked genuine, natural conversational talent. The ultimate, crushing humiliation came when television executives were briefly considering Chase as a potential permanent replacement for the late-night throne. Carson completely destroyed that possibility with a legendary, brutal assessment of his abilities, famously stating to executives and colleagues that Chase was entirely incapable of ad-libbing or holding a real, unscripted conversation. Because of his terrible attitude and his absolute lack of respect for the television process, Chase was permanently banned from ever guest hosting the show again. He lost the greatest promotional platform in the world simply because he refused to treat people with basic professional respect. Tell me in the comments, do you believe Johnny Carson was right to completely banish a massive star to protect his television crew? Or was that an abuse of his late-night power? Number 4, the ultimate betrayal and banishment of Joan Rivers. In the entire history of late-night television, no story of professional heartbreak and absolute banishment is more famous than the permanent exile of Joan Rivers. For over a decade, Rivers was the undisputed heir apparent to Johnny Carson's legendary throne. She was an incredibly sharp, fast-paced comedian who completely dominated the stage and brought massive, undeniable ratings to the network. Carson personally mentored her, helped shape her national television career, and officially named her as his exclusive, permanent guest host. They had a highly successful professional partnership that seemed completely unbreakable to the American public. However, the fiercely competitive nature of the entertainment industry eventually destroyed their relationship overnight. In 1986, a rival television network secretly approached Rivers with a highly lucrative, massive financial contract to host her own competing late-night program. Fearing that Carson and his powerful executives would try to sabotage the deal or fire her immediately, Rivers made a devastating, calculated decision. She signed the massive television contract without ever telling her mentor. Carson did not hear the shocking news from Rivers herself. He found out through a standard corporate press release and industry rumors. The perceived betrayal completely shattered him. Carson was a man who valued intense personal loyalty above all else in the brutal Hollywood system. For him, hiding such a massive career move was an unforgivable offense. He immediately and permanently banned Rivers from his television program. He completely erased his former protege from the history of his show, refusing to ever speak her name on the air again. For the rest of his life, despite her continuous public apologies and attempts to simply explain her side of the difficult business decision, Carson never answered her phone calls and never spoke a single word to her again. It was a chilling, absolute demonstration of his ultimate power, proving that even his closest allies could be erased instantly if they crossed him. Tell me in the comments, do you believe Johnny Carson was right to completely erase his friend over a business decision? Or was Joan Rivers just protecting her own career in a ruthless industry? Number 5, the intoxicated disgrace of Oliver Reed. During the classic era of cinema, Oliver Reed built a massive and highly successful career playing intense, aggressively tough characters. He was widely celebrated as one of the ultimate icons of cinematic masculinity, commanding incredible physical presence on the screen. However, his reputation away from the cameras for extreme and heavy drinking was just as famous as his legendary acting roles. While many television programs completely avoided booking him because of his highly unpredictable and volatile nature, The Tonight Show took the calculated risk of bringing the famous tough guy onto national television. It was a decision that quickly devolved into one of the most chaotic and uncomfortable broadcasts in the history of the legendary program. When Reed finally walked onto the iconic stage and sat next to Johnny Carson, it was immediately and painfully obvious to millions of viewers that the actor was heavily intoxicated. He was severely slurring his words, completely ignoring the basic rules of a professional television interview, and aggressively interrupting the host. Instead of participating in a normal promotional conversation, Reed became belligerent, treating the highly respected stage like a chaotic late-night establishment. He began rambling incoherently and behaving aggressively toward the other guests, creating a deeply tense and uncomfortable atmosphere for everyone in the studio. The live audience nervously watched as the massive cinematic star completely lost control of his public image. Johnny Carson, an absolute master of controlling his broadcast, recognized that the situation was rapidly destroying the quality of his show. Instead of calling for security, Carson used his sharp television instincts to publicly humiliate the actor and regain total control. He leaned back behind his desk, adopted a freezing cold expression, and began delivering perfectly timed, highly sarcastic remarks that highlighted exactly how ridiculous the famous tough guy was behaving. Carson essentially allowed Reed to embarrass himself in front of the entire country, using brief and cutting observations to ensure the audience was laughing at the actor's behavior. It was a brutal televised lesson proving that you never disrespected the king of late night on his own stage. Tell me in the comments, do you think Johnny Carson handled the intoxicated actor perfectly, or should he have stopped the interview immediately to protect the star's reputation? Number 6. The deflation of Robert Blake. During the 1970s, Robert Blake was one of the most famous television actors in the world, renowned for playing a highly aggressive, street-smart and uncompromising tough guy on a massive hit police drama. He built his entire public image around being incredibly macho, highly combative, and completely resistant to standard Hollywood authority. When he appeared as a guest on The Tonight Show, he clearly decided to bring this exact same aggressive television persona directly to Johnny Carson's iconic desk. Right from the very beginning of the interview, Blake attempted to establish absolute dominance over the conversation. He was intensely combative, highly arrogant, and actively tried to intimidate the host with a physically aggressive posture and sharp, disrespectful responses. He essentially tried to turn a simple promotional talk show appearance into a hostile interrogation, challenging Carson's authority on his own stage. However, attempting to intimidate the undisputed king of late-night television was a massive, highly embarrassing mistake. Johnny Carson was a man who had faced the most powerful executives and the sharpest comedians in the world. He was completely unaffected by a television actor's manufactured tough guy routine. Instead of backing down or showing any signs of intimidation, Carson masterfully used his incredible wit and perfect comedian timing to completely disarm the aggressive actor. Whenever Blake attempted to make a threatening or overly macho statement, Carson would effortlessly respond with a highly sarcastic, incredibly sharp joke that instantly deflated the actor's intense energy. Carson essentially treated Blake like a misbehaving child throwing a tantrum, refusing to take the hostility seriously. By simply remaining perfectly calm, leaning back in his chair, and delivering brilliantly timed comedic insults, Carson completely neutralized the aggression. The studio audience laughed uncontrollably, not with the actor, but directly at his absurdly intense behavior. It was a flawless demonstration of Carson's absolute control, proving to the entire country that a sharp mind will always defeat blind arrogance on live television. Tell me in the comments, do you think the actor was just trying to entertain the audience with his tough guy persona, or did he actually believe he could intimidate the host? Number 7. The monologue rebellion of Wayne Newton. Wayne Newton was a monumental, highly celebrated figure in the American entertainment industry, universally recognized as the absolute king of Las Vegas. He commanded massive, sold-out audiences with his incredible musical performances and established a highly successful, glamorous presence in both film and television. During this incredibly powerful era of classic media, there was an unwritten, ironclad rule in the entertainment business. If Johnny Carson used his legendary live television monologue to make fun of you, you were supposed to simply smile, accept the national embarrassment, and consider it a massive professional honor. You never, under any circumstances, challenged the host's absolute authority. For years, Carson used his unmatched, heavily watched television platform to continuously and aggressively mock the legendary Vegas performer. He relentlessly targeted Newton with highly personal, deeply uncomfortable comments regarding his physical appearance, his distinctive vocal style, and his traditional masculinity. The late-night host essentially used the live broadcast to repeatedly humiliate the musical icon in front of millions of viewers, turning a highly respected artist into a constant, easy target for national amusement. Carson, sitting safely behind his powerful desk, fully expected the singer to remain entirely passive and simply endure the nightly, broadcasted humiliation like every other terrified celebrity in the Hollywood system. However, Newton possessed a fierce, uncompromising pride and completely refused to play the role of the quiet, submissive victim. He decided to completely shatter the established, strict rules of the late-night television empire. After enduring years of this highly public and deeply damaging embarrassment, Newton took unprecedented, shocking action against the most powerful man in television. He bypassed the public studio audience entirely, marched directly into the heavily guarded executive offices of the television network, and confronted the undisputed king of late-night face-to-face. This intense, highly aggressive, and legendary confrontation completely changed the power dynamic of the industry. Newton explicitly demanded respect and effectively forced the host to permanently stop the live television humiliation. It was an incredible moment that proved not every classic star was willing to sacrifice their personal dignity to appease the late-night machine. Tell me in the comments, do you believe the singer was right to aggressively confront the host? Or should he have just accepted the nightly television mockery as part of being a famous celebrity? So, looking back at these highly controversial television moments, I have to ask, do you think Johnny Carson was too harsh on his guests, or was he simply protecting the integrity of his legendary show? Please let me know your honest opinions in the comments below. If you appreciate uncovering the true history behind vintage Hollywood and classic entertainment, please hit that like button and make sure to follow us for more incredible stories.